Well, welcome back to the show. We're talking about Turkey's elections and victory for President Erdogan, who's won a new term as his country's leader. Let's get back to our panel. And Giran, let me start with you. What does this election victory for President Erdogan mean, and of course the legislative victory as well in Parliament? What does it mean for Turkey's Kurds?
Well, I think the way we can read this is we can look back at the last 2 years. Now, that we come off the back of a peace process that continued until 2015, in which we saw that Erdogan can, when he chooses, invest in making peace with the Kurds and actually with the PKK that both your guests, both in New York and London, have emphasized that is a terrorist organization. But Erdogan himself and the Turkish government, they themselves entered into a peace process, taking the PKK as the other side of that process. So, and this was a good thing. We can't sit here and criticize this process. This was a good attempt by Erdogan, but we saw that if it doesn't make electoral sense for him, he can pull back away from this. And he's shifted all the way to the other side now in his alliance with the MHP, which is an ultra-nationalist party in Turkey. And now with his alliance with the MHP and his dependence on the MHP now in Parliament at least, for the Kurds, I think this doesn't bear any good prospects for the future, because we've seen in the last 2 years, after the collapse of the peace process, Erdogan has intensified his military efforts against the Kurds, both within Turkey, but also across the border in northern Syria and right now in northern Iraq too. So I think we can expect some sort of an intensification of military efforts by Erdogan, and with his dependence on the MHP now in Parliament, I think this is almost guaranteed.
Ali Cinar, what are the president's options when it comes to dealing with the Kurds? I mean, as we just heard, there could be more deeper divisions here, or will he try to heal the country, bring it together?
During the campaign, President Erdogan promised that he's going to lift the state of emergency, which is a good thing for Turkish democracy. And he talked about the freedom of press, human rights issues. Yes, there are problems in Turkey. And President Erdogan, with the new system, with the new reforms, I think it will be much better to have an open dialogue with all communities in Turkey. So I see a positive move from President Erdogan and his team with the new structure. So I'm very optimistic that there will be more collaboration with other parties and check and balances at the Turkish Parliament.
Aykan, what are your views on how the president brings the country together? How does he heal these divisions that are there?
Now, he'll need a major U-turn. First of all, he criminalized all the opposition during the elections, not only the pro-Kurdish HDP, but also, pro-secular CHP, the new center-right Good Party. So across the board, the whole opposition parties have been smeared as criminal and as terrorist. So now there needs to be a U-turn from that, because half the parliament.
Hakan, I will come to you in a moment.
Because half the parliament and half the voter base is now technically criminal, is technically pawns of criminal networks. So consensus building and reconciliation will necessitate first accepting the opposition parties as legitimate actors, as legitimate stakeholders. I think the opposition parties across the board have proven that they're open to dialogue because they have come together. For example, the CHP encouraged loaning 15 of its lawmakers to the Good Party. CHP voters supported tactically HDP to make sure it passed the threshold. This is, I think, a good foundation for consensus building and reconciliation in Turkey.
Okay, Hakan, go ahead.
I think Aykan's run out of arguments, so he's just coming up with this criminality theory that nobody knows nothing about in Turkey, including myself, and nobody talks about it the way he does. And I gotta tell you something about HDP. They don't represent Kurdish population in Turkey. They don't represent the Kurdish ethnic population in Turkey. They only get 8% of the vote. However, the problem with HDP's affiliation with PKK is a problem. PKK is globally accepted terrorist organization, as your guest in studio in Washington will tell you. And it's accepted as a terrorist organization by US, Western world, the whole world. And Turkey has every legal and legitimate right to fight against a terrorist organization that actually bombs civilians and the security forces. I don't think we should even debate this. What we should debate, however, is sincere and true efforts made by Recep Tayyip Erdogan, as confirmed by your guest. In 2015, that was actually knocked out by the HDP, Selahattin Demirtas, who's actually running that party right now. They need to come back and actually talk about this ongoing issues so we can actually resolve them. We do need to resolve them. You know, nobody actually wants this to go on. But there has to be understanding that no state will allow terrorist organization covered by a political entity to operate in its borders, killing civilians and security forces. If we can actually have a consensus on this, we can overcome this issue. I don't see any problem.
Okay.
We tried in the past, we can do it again.
Giran, you want to respond to that quickly?
Yeah, I mean, I think that your guest in London may think some of this is a joke, and some of his facts and figures are also a bit of a joke. Selahattin Demirtas is not running the HDP right now. He's been in prison for 20 months, and the HDP polled in 11.5%, not 8% of the vote. And I'm not going to sit here as a representative of a party who gets a significant portion of the Kurdish vote.
Right.
I wouldn't even sit here and say we are the sole representatives of the Kurds. So for him to argue that the HDP is not, is something that I will never be able to understand. The HDP, the facts are there, the figures are there. The HDP gets a significant portion of support from the Kurdish people. And yes, the HDP will raise the Kurdish agenda in Turkey for a long time to come. The issue here is that their insistence on the PKK, yes, the PKK legally around the world is categorized as a terrorist organization. But when it comes to peace, when it comes to establishing peace in the country, and I sit here and commend Erdogan for doing that in the time, 3 or 4 years ago, that he was able to sit down with what your guest believes is a terrorist organization, and is also classed as a terrorist organization in Turkey too. But Erdogan was able to sit down with that movement himself. He openly declared this himself. So for him to now sit here and accuse the HDP of having an affiliation with the PKK and to try to criminalize us in that way is a bit of a joke, to be honest.
Okay, Ali Cinar, I want to move on and look at the importance of this election in the region. How important is it for that region? I mean, Turkey is in a very tough neighborhood. There's conflict in Iraq, in Syria as well. How will this election be seen?
Many world leaders congratulate Erdogan since yesterday. Turkish foreign policy right now will be also changing because there will be a new reform, new system in the ministries. European Union Ministry of European Affairs and the Turkish Foreign Ministry will be combined, and it will be only one ministry for the foreign affairs policy. And yes, there are problems in Middle East, but without Turkey, there is no solution in Middle East. And the West has to understand that President Erdogan is not going anywhere. He will be in power till 2023, and he is going to lead and communicate all the region leaders and solve the issues. So I see that open dialogue, collaboration with the neighborhood is very important and critical. But as I said, without Turkey's support and leadership, I don't see any solution in Middle East and Europe.
Aykan, how big is security an issue for Turkey?
No, certainly, I think security comes only second to economy, but it continues to be a key issue. And when you read Turkish political analyses, you will often see references to existential threats. So to understand Turkey, I think one has to understand, one has to start by understanding Turkey's security concerns. But the problem there is there's a conflation of two different concepts of security. One is state security and the other one is human security. Now, a lot of Turkey's problems stem from human security issues. And human security is not only about, access to, food, shelter, health services, but it's also about rights and freedoms. It's also about democracy. It's also about human rights. And unless Turkey has a comprehensive approach to state and human security approaches, which is also underlined in NATO's understanding of security, it will be very difficult to make progress.
Hakan, the President Erdogan, made some critical statements recently when it came to Israel. He criticized, took a hard line on Israel over the killing of dozens of Palestinian protesters by Israeli troops. He also called on Muslim leaders in the region to unite and to confront Israel. He also criticized that U.S. decision to move the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Do you expect that President Erdogan is going to take a bigger role as a leader now in the Muslim world?
I'll be honest with you, he's expected to, because he is the loudest voice, raises these concerns globally. Unfortunately, we have not seen a similar approach from other Muslim leaders in Muslim countries. And unfortunately, that's because you should really unite. This is a common cause. You've seen the suffering of people in Gaza, elsewhere in Palestine. You see every day killing going on, and nobody talks about it. This is so unacceptable. These issues are quite concerning for us, both from a moral point of view, and especially the suffering of people in Gaza is something that really is in the heart of many in Turkey. So I expect him to be really aggressive and assertive in raising the ongoing problems in that region, especially what Israel does. I mean, nobody agrees with what Israel does, but Recep Tayyip Erdogan speaks about it loudly to garner support from the global audience.
Ali, Turkey is also a key member of NATO, but there have been tensions between NATO and Turkey on Turkey's relationship with Russia. Does this election in any way change the Turkey-NATO relationship?
I don't think so it will change. I mean, Turkey has the second largest military in NATO, and today the NATO Secretary General called President Erdogan and congratulated his victory. So Turkey has a still strong position in NATO. Yes, there are some disagreements, but we need to remember that Russia is a neighbor of Turkey, and Turkey has to work with Russia and other neighbors in the region. So I don't think there will be a big problem talking and working with neighborhood, but at the same time, Turkey still recognizes the importance of NATO and work with the NATO allies.
Giran, very quickly, the AK party has also won a majority in parliament. How significant is that?
I mean, they haven't won a majority in parliament themselves, not as a party, but with their coalition. I mean, the significance, I say, with that is that, and one of the main winners of this election is the ultra-nationalist MHP. I mean, Devlet Bahçeli, the leader of the party, barely ran a campaign, and although hardly any poll showed him above 7%, he gained 11%, and that was one of the main surprises of this election. And now with him and his MPs, with the MHP MPs providing the AKP with the majority in parliament, I think gives them a huge leverage on the policies that Erdogan and the AKP will pursue in the near future.
Okay, and we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. Thanks for being with us.